The street is quiet, but not the kind of quiet that feels safe. Dust hangs in the air, unmoving, as if even the wind knows better than to interfere. Somewhere in the distance, a boot scrapes against wood. And then, stillness. Every eye is locked on one man. Wild Bill Hickok doesn't move much, but he doesn't need to. His hand hovers just inches above a pair of ivory-handled revolvers, worn smooth from use, not decoration. This isn't for show. This is survival. And everyone standing on that street knows it, because with Hickok, the moment always comes fast. There are stories, plenty of them. Some say he could draw faster than a blink. Others swear he never missed. But out here, reputation isn't built on words. It's built on what happens in the space between one heartbeat and the next. And Hickok's reputation? It wasn't just feared, it was trusted. Trusted to end things quickly. But that raises the question that's followed him through history. What really made him so dangerous? Was it those ivory-handled revolvers, balanced, precise extensions of his own hands? Or was it something deeper? The calm, the timing, the way he seemed to exist half a second ahead of everyone else in the room, because in the Old West, speed alone didn't keep you alive. Control did, and Hickok had both. So before we get lost in the legend, we have to step closer to the truth. Because the real story isn't just about the guns he carried, it's about how he used them. At first glance, they look like something out of a legend. Bright, polished, almost too refined for the grit of the frontier. The ivory-handled revolvers carried by Wild Bill Hickok have been romanticized for generations, often dismissed as nothing more than a flashy signature. But out on a dusty street where hesitation could cost your life, nothing was chosen lightly. Those ivory grips weren't just about appearance. They were about control. Unlike standard wooden grips, which could swell, crack, or become slick with sweat, ivory offered a smoother, more consistent feel in the hand. In a high-pressure moment, when your pulse spikes and your palms turn damp, that difference matters. It meant a steadier hold, a cleaner draw, and fewer surprises when it counted most. There's also the question of visibility. Ivory stands out. In low light or swirling dust, those pale grips were easier to track in your peripheral vision, helping Hickok maintain awareness of his draw without needing to look down. It's a subtle edge, but in a fight measured in fractions of a second, subtle edges decide outcomes. And then there's the psychological side. When people saw those revolvers, they knew exactly who they were dealing with. That recognition carried weight. It built tension before a shot was ever fired. In some cases, it may have even ended confrontations before they began. So no, those revolvers weren't just decoration. They were tools chosen with intent, refined through experience, and integrated into the way Hickok fought. Because, for him, every detail mattered, and the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that nothing about his approach was accidental. Most men reached for their gun the same way, fast, direct, predictable. But Wild Bill Hickok didn't fight like most men. He built his entire approach around something different, something deliberate, the cross-draw. Instead of wearing his revolvers on his hips for a straight pull, Hickok positioned them for a reach across his body. It might sound slower at first, but in practice, it gave him options others didn't have. Sitting at a poker table, leaning back in a chair, or even caught off guard in a crowded saloon, he could access his weapon without the exaggerated movement of a traditional draw. And in a world where the first visible motion could trigger a gunfight, that subtlety mattered. Picture the scene. A tense room, voices low, chairs creaking. Most men would have to shift, telegraph their intent before their hand ever touched the grip. Hickok? He could move naturally, almost casually, his arm crossing his chest in a motion that didn't immediately scream danger. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the gun was already coming level. But the real advantage wasn't just the draw, it was control. Cross-draw required discipline, repetition, and precision. There was no room for sloppy movement. Hickok trained for that. He wasn't chasing speed for the sake of it. He was chasing certainty. Every motion had to land exactly where it needed to, every time. And that's what set him apart. It wasn't instinct. It was a system. One built on positioning, timing, and relentless practice, because in Hickok's world, the fight wasn't won by who moved first, but by who moved right. Gunfights in the Old West weren't clean, and they definitely weren't graceful. They were loud, chaotic, and over in seconds. Most shots fired too fast, too wild, and too close to miss. But Wild Bill Hickok didn't fight that way. Where others reacted, he aimed. That's the difference. Accounts of Hickok's shooting don't describe a man emptying his revolvers in a panic. They describe control, deliberate fire, the kind of composure that feels almost out of place in a moment built on adrenaline. While others rushed to be first, Hickok focused on being right. And in a fight, that distinction was everything. Imagine two men facing off in the fires twice, misses both in the rush. Hickok draws a fraction slower, steadies and fires once. That single shot lands. Fight over. That wasn't luck. That was discipline under pressure. Part of it came down to familiarity. His revolvers weren't just weapons. They were extensions of his hands. He knew their weight, their balance, the exact pressure needed on the trigger. His stance remained steady, his grip consistent, even when everything around him fell apart. There's even evidence suggesting he understood spacing and timing in ways that resemble early tactical awareness. Keeping distance, choosing angles, controlling the moment instead of being consumed by it. Because the truth is, real gunfights weren't won by who fired the most shots. They were won by who made their shots count, and Hickok made his count. Which raises an even deeper question. If his precision was this refined, how much of it was skill, and how much of it was something more? Before a single shot was fired, the fight was often already over. That's the kind of power Wild Bill Hickok carried into a room, not just in his hands, but in his name. By the time most men faced him, they weren't just dealing with a person. They were facing every story they'd ever heard, every whispered warning, every tale of a man who didn't miss. And that changes everything. Fear has a way of slowing people down. It makes the hand hesitate just long enough. It clouds judgment, turns simple decisions into fatal mistakes. A man who might be quick and confident against anyone else suddenly second-guesses himself. Does he draw now? Wait a second longer? Is he already too late? Against Hickok, those questions could cost you your life. Picture a saloon confrontation. Two men standing across from each other, tension thick in the air. One of them recognizes those ivory grips instantly, recognizes the calm, almost detached look on Hickok's face. And in that moment, doubt creeps in. His focus splits. His timing slips. Hickok doesn't need to rush, because the other man is already unraveling. That was the real edge. His revolvers weren't just weapons. They were symbols, proof of who he was and what he'd done. They told a story before he ever touched them. And in many cases, that story was enough to tip the balance without a trigger ever being pulled. Because Hickok didn't just fight with bullets, he fought with certainty. And when one man walks in certain and the other walks in afraid, the outcome is already leaning in one direction. Forget the clean duels and perfectly timed draws. The reality of gunfights in the Old West was anything but controlled. They happened in cramped saloons, dimly lit streets, and open ground where dust, noise, and confusion swallowed everything. Visibility was poor, distances were inconsistent, and adrenaline turned even steady hands unpredictable. Most fights didn't look like skill. They looked like survival. And that's exactly where Wild Bill Hickok stood apart. While others were caught in the chaos, Hickok seemed to operate just outside of it. Where one man might panic and fire wildly in a crowded room, Hickok kept his composure. Where another might misjudge distance in low light, he adjusted. His grip, his cross-draw, his accuracy, none of it was built for show. It was built for moments like these. Picture a sudden eruption inside a saloon. Chairs scrape back, someone shouts, a gun clears leather. Most men react instantly, too instantly, firing without control. But Hickok? He creates a fraction of space in his mind, enough to steady, to aim, to choose the shot instead of hoping for it. That's the difference between chaos and control. Out on the street, it wasn't much better. Uneven ground, shifting light, the constant tension of who would move first. Every variable worked against you. Unless you were prepared for them, Hickok was, because his success wasn't luck, and it wasn't myth. It was preparation meeting opportunity in the worst conditions imaginable. And once you understand how unpredictable these fights really were, you start to see just how rare that level of control truly is. For all the stories, all the fear, and all the legend, the truth is this: Wild Bill Hickok didn't rely on magic. He relied on tools. Simple, mechanical, unforgiving tools that only worked as well as the man using them. His revolvers weren't the most advanced weapons of their time, and they didn't need to be. What mattered was reliability. When Hickok reached for his gun, it had to fire. No hesitation, no failure, no second chances. In a world where a misfire could mean death, consistency was more valuable than raw power. These revolvers demanded familiarity. Every ounce of weight, every bit of recoil, every subtle resistance in the trigger. It all had to be known. Hickok didn't switch weapons constantly or chase the latest design. He stayed with what he understood. That deep familiarity allowed him to act without thinking, to trust that the weapon would respond exactly as expected when the moment came. And then there were the limitations. Unlike the rapid-fire fantasies we see today, these revolvers were slow to reload. Once those rounds were spent, the fight changed instantly. That reality forced discipline. Hickok couldn't afford wasted shots or reckless firing. Every pull of the trigger had to mean something. Every movement had to conserve advantage. Imagine standing in a fight knowing you only have a handful of chances, and no time to recover if you miss. That pressure shapes how you think, how you move, how you fight. Which is why his revolvers were never the whole story. They were just one part of a system built on trust, precision, and control. And that system is what made him deadly. So after all the stories, all the tension, and all the moments that seem almost too precise to be real, we come back to the question that started it all. What actually made those ivory-handled revolvers so deadly? The answer is simpler than the legend, and far more powerful. Wild Bill Hickok wasn't dangerous because of what he carried. He was dangerous because of how he used it. The ivory grips, the cross-draw, the calm under pressure, the accuracy. They weren't separate traits. They were parts of a system built on control, discipline, and an understanding of what a fight really demanded. In a world defined by chaos, Hickok created structure. Where others reacted, he prepared. Where others relied on speed, he relied on certainty. His revolvers were simply the final link in that chain. Tools that translated his decisions into action. Think about it. Put those same guns in the hands of someone untrained, and they're just metal and powder. But in Hickok's hands, they became something else entirely. Not because they were special, but because he was. That's the truth behind the myth. Legends aren't built on equipment. They're built on mastery. On the ability to stay composed when everything around you falls apart. To make the right decision when there's no time to think, and to execute it without hesitation. And that's why Hickok's name still carries weight today. Because in the end, the secret was never just the gun. It was the man who knew exactly how to use it.